Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be just a little bit different. I'm not going to have the background gameplay, and I'm actually recording this live because for this discussion and what I'm going to be talking about, I think this is a little bit more useful than just some random background gameplay and me talking, because I'm going to be able to show off a little bit more of the research around this. So today we're going to be talking about probably one of the biggest announcements and changes to the sandbox that was announced in the recent TWAB, and that's Ricochet Rounds. Ricochet Rounds are getting nerfed, and it says here, remove the hidden bonus to damage fall off. What this means is essentially, since the release of Destiny 2, Ricochet Rounds have granted 10% bonus to range. This is the same bonus actually that Rangefinder would give, and Rangefinder wasn't even in the game yet. Now the difference, you could say, between Ricochet Rounds and Rangefinder is, of course, Ricochet Rounds is a magazine perk, and Rangefinder, I believe, is a trait perk. This also means that some weapons out there can roll both. It's rare, but some weapons can roll both and get absurd range from this. The other difference is that Rangefinder actually increases the zoom while you're ADS on your weapon in order to give you a range increase. Now, Ricochet Rounds doesn't increase the zoom, but still gives you that 10% range increase. Now, that's advantageous because there are some people that don't particularly like Rangefinder on the weapon because the increased zoom kind of affects your muscle memory. And, you might not particularly like that. Ricochet Rounds will give you that same bonus without the quote-unquote cost of having to have higher zoom. So it's a very strong perk. It's very powerful. I'm honestly quite surprised it's lasted this long now before actually getting a nerf to that hidden damage fall off. Now, let's talk about the weapons that this impacts most. In my opinion, this is going to be impacting hand cannons and SMGs most. Now, of course, I know that it's going to impact other weapons, of course, that can roll Ricochet Rounds, maybe a combination with the Rangefinder, and even sidearms are one of those weapons that it does impact. I don't think it's as impactful to sidearms, though, because they do have quite high damage output, and it's not really pushing their range too much further than it's already going. Whereas SMGs are kind of known to have what's dubbed as auto rifle range, simply because Ricochet Rounds really pushes that range out and retains that damage for some of these SMGs. We all know the first one that comes to mind is the NTPD. On hand cannons, though, it's really important, I think, because this pushes the range of the hand cannons out from just mid-range to mid-long, maybe what would be considered most long-range lanes on maps. Like even some lanes on dead cliffs, you can actually deal pretty significant damage with a hand cannon, with Ricochet Rounds, and maybe a combination of Ricochet Rounds and Rangefinder together. So I think these two weapons are what the nerf is going to impact most. It's going to bring them back in line a bit. Now, this nerf is going to impact what I think are these weapons the most. I selected some of the best known and, in my opinion, best options out of hand cannons and SMGs that this nerf will impact. Obviously, they currently all roll or are known for having Ricochet Rounds as being a talking point as to why these weapons are top tier or popular choices. We have the Jack Queen King, Service Revolver, Waking Vigil, Spare Rations, and Duke. Now, I put little stars here next to the Spare Rations and Duke because these are two weapons, maybe two of the only weapons at all out of hand cannons that actually can roll Ricochet Rounds and Rangefinder together for that insane range capability. In terms of SMGs, we have the, of course, ever popular since the release NTPD and its blue counterpart, the Sondok C. We have the Callus Mini Tool, we have the Recluse, Hero's Burden, and Huckleberry, all very strong, popular SMGs that have their range boosted by Ricochet Rounds. Of course, NTPD having the insane range, plus high zoom, plus Ricochet Rounds. Callus Mini Tool also having crazy range, plus Ricochet Rounds. Recluse having a very lethal perk, plus its damage being retained by Ricochet Rounds, so very potent weapons here. So let's quickly talk about Ricochet Rounds as a perk though. So this is a little resource or spreadsheet by Destiny Massive Breakdowns here that lists other magazine perks. We have to compare Ricochet Rounds to other magazine perks because it is a magazine perk. It does go in that slot. And let's look at what we get from other magazine perks in terms of range. Accurize Rounds is the only magazine perk that gives more range than Ricochet Rounds clearly does, and this boosts the weapon by 10 range rather than 5. And Ricochet Rounds still gives the standard that light mag, armor piercing, and high cal or other range affecting mag options give. It gives plus 5 range. So it's actually still on par with most other magazine range boosts. And not to mention, it gives you a boost to stability. This is really important because stability and range are, in my opinion, the two most important perks on a weapon, and these are the most important perks in terms of affecting how your weapon feels. And I think that's an important thing. That's the main talking point I have here, is that stability and range really impact the way your weapon is going to feel in terms of the consistency. So that's why I think they're very, very valuable perks. Considering that Accurize Rounds is the only thing that gives above 5 range, and Ricochet is the only thing that gives a combination or grants a boost to a combination of stability and range, I think Ricochet is still a top tier perk, and probably for many people the best perk, unless you're really looking to maximize on range. You don't mind not having the extra stability, and you go for Accurize Rounds. But that, of course, is also dependent on, is Accurize Rounds present on the weapon that you're looking to use or farm for? And that's where we'll get into my spreadsheet I made. So, I made a spreadsheet here of different weapons and the ones that can roll combinations of Accurize or High Cal with Ricochet or both. To do this, I looked at light.gg. They have a really cool resource called the God Roll Finder. You can essentially filter your weapon type and perks and see which weapons have that or a combination of both. So we can see here on this tab, I have all hand cannons that can roll either Accurized or Ricochet or both together. And we can see all of them here. You can take a look at this. And then in the next tab, I have all the SMGs that can roll Ricochet or Accurized or both. And you can take a look at that here. Finally, I have a tab with all the hand cannons that can roll Ricochet Rounds, High Cals, or both. And this will be important in just a second, but you can see these over here. Why is this important? So if we take a look at the spreadsheet here, Ricochet Rounds is only not a competitive option if you're really trying to max out range if Accurized is present on the weapon. So, which hand cannons can get both Ricochet and Accurized at this point in time pre-Shadowkeep? We have Jack Queen King, Service Revolver, Thin Line, and 10 Paces. These two are 110s that already have pretty high range, so honestly, probably don't have to worry about them. In terms of maybe like wanting Accurized, you probably want Ricochet for the stability because they lack it anyways and have tons of range, but these two are the important options. We have Jack Queen King and Service Revolver. Now, Service Revolver, although it may be popular for some controller users and some console players, I don't think it's the top of the line most competitive option for you guys. And, you know, being a controller player, this is how I feel about it. It's a great weapon, don't get me wrong, it's probably better in quick play, but I think the top competitive option is Not Forgotten or Luna's Howl. So that weapon kind of overshadows Service Revolver, even though Service Revolver has good potential. You know, I do think obviously you'd go for Accurized Rounds on it, but it's just not really, you know, enough to think about. Jack Queen King is also power crept, of course, being a year 1 weapon. It doesn't have random rolls, it doesn't have as many perks. Other weapons have better stats, and it's power crept directly by Spare Rations, in which Spare Rations get Rangefinder and Ricochet or Rangefinder and other range increasing perks. So Jack Queen King isn't really used too often either. So the hand cannons that do have both of these that would hypothetically force you to choose between Accurized and Ricochet aren't really the most popular, viable, or things that you'd have to think about it on anyways. However, if you do have Ricochet present on a weapon, obviously without Accurize, considering that these are the only ones that get it, but if you have Ricochet and other perks like High Cals or other range increasing perks, I think that that's the only time you'd want to take a perk over Ricochet. What I mean is, if it does have High Cal, that might be enticing to you over Ricochet Rounds. I still think that as a controller player, you want that bonus 10 stability. And maybe if you're an M&K player, you like that stability as well. But for controller, the way I feel about it is it feels like stability is a little bit more of a factor. It feels or appears more drastic. That's not a dish or trying to get into a debate. It's just the way I think a lot of people view controller and the weapons the way the weapons behave. So I think that Ricochet Rounds is still a better option. However, because of the stability bonus and standardized range bonus of 5. However, if you think that the stability is not as valuable, or if you're on M&K and you think that the stability is fine already, perhaps, for whatever reason you have, perks like High Cals specifically might be a really enticing option. So what are the hand cannons that get both Ricochet and a High Cal? Because these are the only hand cannons where you'd be forced to make this decision. We have the Duke, we have Spare Rations, Waking Vigil, and Thin Line. I don't particularly think High Cal is the greatest on Duke or Thin Line, being 110s already, but I mean, that's subjective. But let's talk about Spare Rations and Waking Vigil. These are two very powerful 150 RPM hand cannons, and considering the way that flinch works, from my tests, from what I know and what I think, and I could be wrong, flinch scales to damage output. And hand cannons are the highest damage dealing weapon per shot, per singular bullet, out of anything in the primary slot, I believe. So, considering that, they're already going to have high flinch. If you want to have a little bit higher on top of two hand cannons that would be, considered to have pretty high DPS and a moderately fast rate of fire, maybe you want High Cals on top of that too for a little bit more disruption towards your opponent if you don't think the stability is worth it. Spare Rations and Waking Vigil would be the only two weapons or popular options or top competitive viable options where you'd be forced to make this decision on. Maybe you want High Cal, maybe you want Ricochet, totally up to you and your preference and scenario. Point here being though, is Ricochet Rounds is still a top tier perk. It's still a very good, in my opinion, best in slot option, unless of course you want Accurized, unless of course you want High Cals, the only two scenarios that would contest it. But I think Ricochet Rounds, because it gives you that increase of both stability and range, is crazy good. Yes, it's not going to be as good as before. It's not going to be a built-in rangefinder minus the cost of rangefinder, but that's okay because that's a little bit of an outlier. Right, it's already really good. That made it very much of an outlier. Now it's going to bring weapons a little bit back in towards their intended ranges and still be a top tier perk while doing that. Another thing to mention is that no SMGs can actually have Accurize and Ricochet together. It's either they have one or the other. So the same logic applies. If you have Ricochet, you're probably getting the best, unless of course you can get High Cal. If you're using Callus Mini Tool, for example, I have one with max range and Ricochet. I, again, am on the stance that I'd keep my stability boost rather than High Cal, but if you want High Cal, you're still getting the same range after the Ricochet Round nerf. And, of course, you are, not really, you're only losing out on the stability. So, your discretion, of course, whatever you think is better. Or if you happen to get a roll on a weapon with High Cal and you're sufficient with that, you don't want to keep farming, then you can go for that as well. But if you have Accurize, you're probably going to have the best. If you have Accurize, if you have Ricochet and it has High Cal, or if it doesn't have High Cal, you have the best. And if it has High Cal, you can make that decision. The other thing to think about, last little note, is will Seraph Rounds evade the Ricochet Rounds nerf? This would be really interesting. I don't think it's that big of a deal if they do dodge the Ricochet Rounds nerf, but it would give a little tiny bit of a buff towards the Aikilos weapons that have Seraph Rounds. And again, it wouldn't make them usable, it wouldn't make people all of a sudden flock to it and make them top tier weapons, but it would be a little bit of a small niche reason or effectiveness to use those Aikilos weapons. Anyways, guys, I don't want to keep you any longer. I hope you enjoyed this discussion video. It's been fun talking about it. I still think Ricochet Rounds is a top tier perk, but if you think the same or if you think otherwise, let me know in the comments below. Tell me your thoughts on this. Are you still going to use Ricochet, or are you back to the drawing board farming for something else? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you guys later. Until the next one, take care.